Welcome. I'm the president of external affairs for CUSG, and this is my colleague sitting on the far right and fellow CUSG president John Lurkwin. It's our pleasure this morning to introduce Chancellor De Stefano. Chancellor De Stefano is a first-generation college graduate who was born and raised in the diverse working-class steel and coal town of Steubenville, Ohio. He began his education career as a high school English teacher near his hometown. He has been on campus for 42 years, starting as an assistant professor of education. In those 42 years, he has seen this campus grow and change immensely, including its increasingly diverse enrollment. But he is the first to tell you there is a difference between diverse and inclusive. That's what we are here to talk about today. And with that, I give you Chancellor Philip De Stefano.
Thank you, Joseph, and good morning to everybody. And I want to begin by thanking all of you for joining your colleagues today for this discussion, which is vital to the future of the university. Before I begin, I want to make a few introductions and begin with my wife, Yvonne, who's sitting here. Regent Linda Shoemaker. Thank you, Linda. I would also like for my cabinet to stand. And I brought them along to answer the difficult questions. So you'll see me passing the hat here in a few minutes. And I want to thank everyone who's listening and watching via our streaming platform today. So this is our fourth year for Spring Town Hall. And typically I've used this forum to update the campus on our progress on initiatives that I discussed in my annual State of the Campus. And as you know, my three key goals for the campus are achieving high levels of student success, advancing the reputation of the university, and diversifying our sources of revenue. But before we get started today on this important topic of campus climate and embracing inclusivity, I want to give you a quick update on tuition. The students asked that I do that, and this is that time of year. And so I want to just spend a minute or two on tuition because it's of the utmost importance to our students. As many of you know, under the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, or TABOR, which is part of the state constitution, if revenue grows beyond a certain amount, taxes must be refunded to the taxpayers out of the state general fund. And this is the fund that pays K-12 education and higher education support. So even when the state revenue is growing, it can be cut back by these refunds, and we can have our budget cut as a result. I want to thank CUSG for the work that they've been doing with our Office of Government Relations to have one element of the calculation, and that's the hospital provider fee, removed. And if this is advanced and passed by the legislature, we may have some relief and not have a budget cut. And we hope that will all work out. And again, Joseph and John, I want to thank you both for your leadership here. In the meantime, our Chief Financial Officer, Kelly Fox, and I have been working with members of our Board of Regents, and especially with Regent Steve Bosley, who heads up the Finance Committee, to bring forward some promising new proposals for resident tuition. And one current proposal under consideration would raise next year's resident tuition by 5%, but lock it in for 4 years, so that a freshman coming in would see a 5% increase, but he or she would not see another increase in tuition for 4 years. And we would do the same for the second class coming in for the following year, and the third year and fourth year and so on. And I believe this is a way that we can help students and their parents be able to predict what tuition is going to be, rather than having this roller coaster where each April we look at tuition and look at 3% or 4% or 8%. This way, it's predictability. and families will know exactly what their tuition is going to be. I use the example of a freshman in high school today who wants to come to the University of Colorado Boulder when he or she graduates. That student, if this passes, will know exactly what his or her tuition will be for 4 years, even though he or she is just a freshman going into the sophomore year. And so I'm hoping that with the support of the regents, we'll be able to move this forward. Now I really want to turn to the key element of student success, and that's embracing diversity and elevating inclusivity in all of our work. And that's the focus of our gathering today. This semester, the campus released results of its undergraduate and graduate student climate surveys. These surveys have been conducted every 3 or 4 years since 1994. The survey assessed students' level of comfort and feelings of belonging at CU-Boulder and their experiences based upon social identities. Overall, undergraduate students described the campus as welcoming and intellectually stimulating, with 65% of the respondents indicating that they very often felt welcome, and 75% very often felt intellectually stimulated, and 72% strongly agreed that they were proud to be students on this campus. We also discovered that about 1/4 of our students do not share these positive impressions and do not feel a sense of belonging or being welcome on campus. This was evident with special racial and ethnic groups, especially our African American and Black identified students. And that's very concerning, not only to me, but it's concerning to all of us. A welcoming, safe, and inclusive environment for everyone is not only a moral imperative of every community, but it also directly impacts student success. We know that key factors influencing our student retention rates are campus social climate, a culture of inclusive excellence, and the students' academic experience. Today, our goal is to have a conversation that will be ongoing as we continue to improve our campus. And this is only the beginning of the conversation, and everyone's commitment to help evolve our campus is needed if we're going to be successful. Diversity is something to celebrate on our campus. When we achieve a diverse and an inclusive campus culture, one of the greatest values is the opportunity to learn from many different perspectives, cultures, and backgrounds, in and out of the classroom. As the popular Android ad says, be together, not the same. And it's true. We know we are not all the same and never will be, but we must be together if we're going to help everyone here reach their highest potential. This sharing and respect of diverse cultures, opinions, and ideas is the foundation of student success and the underpinning of higher education. My own life and career have been shaped by a great diversity of people and experiences. As Joseph mentioned, I grew up in a diverse coal and steel mining town, was a first-generation college graduate, went on to teach high school English in a rural area, and so I understand the power of diversity to transform the individual and to strengthen the community. And we have made many strides in our diverse enrollment in recent years. Our resident freshman class nearly mirrors the diversity of Colorado high school students graduating. But we want to diversify the student population in all ways: ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, disabilities, religious preferences, socioeconomic status, age, intellectual and political, and geographic diversity. However, as Joseph pointed out, there's a difference between diversity and inclusion. While many in our community are committed to creating and maintaining an inclusive environment on campus, the results of the social climate survey released in January, tells us that we have much more work to do. This must be a broader campus effort, embraced by all. There are certain actions that I can take as chancellor, such as hiring a former Department of Justice civil rights attorney as the Executive Director of Institutional Equity and Compliance, as I did in 2014 with Valerie Simons. So Valerie, please stand. With this new office, under Valerie's leadership, we've instituted a new unified approach to addressing discrimination and harassment. This includes improvements in reporting, investigating, educating, and providing support. In fact, there was a great article on this in our local newspaper over the weekend. The Office of Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement, under the leadership of Bob Boswell, is taking the lead in developing our first comprehensive strategic plan around diversity and inclusive excellence. It hosted 2 diversity summits this year in November and February, and this was the 21st year for the summit. So Bob, thank you for your leadership. And Student Affairs is training resident advisors on cultural awareness and how to facilitate difficult discussions and difficult conversations. And Christina Gonzalez, thank you for your leadership in this area. Well, let's not forget CUSG, our Boulder Faculty Assembly, our Office of Faculty Affairs. They're co-sponsoring a 2-part series of campus discussions focusing on social dynamics inside and outside the classroom. Part 1 was March 9th, and Part 2 will be on April 15th. And I encourage all of you to come to that open forum. Achieving a welcome and inclusive campus is not just the job of one person, one office, one vice chancellor, or one chancellor. It's everyone's job. And I don't have all the answers, and I'll admit that up front, and I wish I did. But in fact, I want to learn from you, and that's why we're having this symposium today, so that I can hear from you. And we'll need to do this as a campus, and that's why we're engaging in this process. Now I want to introduce our student moderators, Joseph Soto, whom you mentioned, met earlier, and John Leclerc. Joseph is the CUSG President of External Affairs. He's a senior Daniels Fund Scholar from Aurora, Colorado, studying political science and history. He's worked as an intern at the White House, the Governor's Office, and the Colorado court system, and has worked on campus at the Office of Admissions and the Wise Law Library. He will teach with Teach for America in Colorado this fall in Denver. So Joseph, welcome. John is CUSG President of Student Affairs. He's a PhD candidate in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience. John earned his bachelor's degree at Western Illinois University and a master's degree at Western Illinois and at CU. At CU, he's worked as a research assistant and a teaching assistant. He's taught weekly labs, and he was the psychology department lead TA. We're also proud that he's a veteran. John served in the U.S. Marine Corps for 4 years. So John, thank you for being here. And you'll probably remember from this past fall, but their colleague and co-president, Beneth Ahanaku, did a great job moderating the fall State of the Campus in October. So I want to again thank our CUSG leaders, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joseph and John to lead the discussion.
Thank you, Chancellor. And thank you for inviting me and Joseph to participate. I'd like to first discuss or explain how today is going to work. Joseph and I consulted several of our peers, and we put together a set of questions about campus climate to ask the Chancellor. And that'll take about 30 minutes. Then we want to open it up to questions from the audience, questions from you. As you walked in, you should have all received an index card. So jot down a question you'd like to ask the Chancellor. And throughout the discussion, throughout the initial Q&A, wave it up in the air, and one of our floor monitors will come by and pick it up. And we'll ask that question on your behalf. And without further ado, we'll get started.
Oh, mine is on. Okay. All right, so the first question we have today is, we've heard about diversity and inclusion efforts in the past, and nothing seems to have changed. So why should students think that things are going to change now?
Joseph, thank you for that softball question coming out of the chute here. I do appreciate that question, and I think it's an important one. Number one, we're having this conversation. I think that's the first thing, that we're having this conversation, and I want it to be a dialogue, as I said earlier, so that I hear from students, faculty, and staff about ways of improving the campus climate. Under Bob's leadership, I mentioned that the Inclusive Excellence Initiative, every academic and administrative unit on the campus is defining inclusive excellence and the values that are reflected in that definition of inclusive excellence. We're also having our forums this semester. And our forums, as I said, are open to all students, faculty, and staff. And it's a way of getting ideas from them and sharing those ideas among groups. The forum, when you think about it, it's open. It's on social media. It's on video. We're not holding back. We're trying to be as transparent as possible in talking about the issues of campus climate, of diversity and inclusion. So I see that that's where things have changed over the years, is that we're putting things out on the table. I want to be transparent as we work with faculty, staff, and students to really get together to solve this important issue.
The graduate student climate survey showed us that about 10% of graduate students report having experienced or observed harassment of some form. What are we doing to improve the climate of graduate students?
Thank you, John. And I think it's important that we actually start off with graduate students, because in the past, we've really talked mainly about our undergraduate student population, and they do make up the majority of students. There's no doubt about it, 25,000 undergraduates and 5,000 graduate students. But it's key for our graduate students to also feel welcoming on campus. And so we're doing a number of things. First, through Valerie's office in OIEC, there's training that goes on. There's training in bystander intervention. There's training in, how to handle, how to manage difficult conversations. There's training that goes on in the area of implicit bias. And so those are key programs that graduate students can take advantage of as they're going through their graduate career. Also, our graduate school. I mean, we do have in our graduate school a way of students who are feeling that they've been discriminated against to go to the graduate school as well as to go to OIEC. I know, John, that UGS and the graduate school are both working together to identify liaisons in each of the departments, graduate student liaisons, where students can come to these liaisons, to these faculty members. Two things have been set up just recently, from my understanding. The first is a graduate student climate task force, which I think will be extremely important for graduate students to be a part of. And to continue that work with our graduate students, with the liaisons in the graduate school, to make sure that we can communicate with each other. So I think that there are many programs for graduate students, and we have to make sure that we're getting the message out to them so that they know where to go, and they know that the responsibility that they have and our faculty have to report any allegation of harassment or discrimination.
Thank you. The Campus Climate Survey also showed us that about 43% of PhD students do not know where to go for help if they had concerns related to student or faculty conduct, such as harassment or discrimination. And about 46% do not feel comfortable even going to their program chairs. How do we resolve this?
Well, I think, as I said earlier in the last question, I think having a liaison in each of the programs, in each of the departments in the schools and colleges. Also, I think it's important to make sure that our graduate directors are trained about issues of harassment and discrimination. And again, it's my understanding that we're working through the graduate school to make sure that that the graduate faculty are trained and know when to report and not when to report these kinds of issues. So I think that that's important. The idea is to get the information out, to make sure that graduate students know where they can turn to. They can go to OIEC. They can go to the Ombuds office. And the Ombuds office, it's a safe place for graduate students, for all students for that matter, to really have a conversation, to talk about issues of safety. There are a couple of very good documents. The Faculty Role and Responsibility document, the Graduate Student Bill of Rights responsibilities. Those are things that I think will help our graduate students to know, number one, what their rights are, and number two, where they need to go for information.
A couple of weeks ago, there was racist graffiti found in Chem 120. The administration had a great response, but we see this around campus in different places, and it doesn't always get that same response. What was different about that one, and why don't we address others the same way?
Thank you, and I'm very pleased at the actions that not only my office took, but many offices across the campus took when this offensive graffiti was found. And I have to start off by thanking members of the Black Student Alliance, because the members of the Black Student Alliance posted that graffiti on their website, and I think they did that around 4:45 in the afternoon. An hour later, by 5:45, it was down, and we had taken care of it. And that was the result of a number of groups working together. We had the Campus Climate Response Team that worked very closely with the affected students. We also had my communication team, along with Bob and Valerie and Christina, making sure that I made a statement quickly about the graffiti, and saying that it's zero tolerance for that, and how we need to address those issues. But again, if you saw that video, if you saw that from me, what I did is to ask all of you to help in this. And that's what's been happening. And I think that's another change. We now have housing and dining service staff members. We have facilities management staff. We have building proctor staff members looking in their various departments and units and seeing if there is graffiti, if there is offensive graffiti that's going to harm populations of students, and to make sure that they report it, that we make sure that we take it off wherever it is, whether it's in a restroom or in the hallway, and we just have to do this as a team. Again, I can't do that by myself. I don't think that the cabinet can do it by themselves. We need each and every one, and that's why I think building proctors, facility management staff, housing and dining staff, we all have to work together. The other thing that we instituted, Joe, is when there is graffiti and it's taken down and it's replaced with that sign that we've been putting on, 2 or 3 days later, within about 72 hours, we go back to make sure that we don't have it again. And again, that's something we haven't done in the past, but it's being vigilant, and it's being vigilant from all walks of the campus.
Thank you. The climate survey told us that as many as 25% of undergraduates report having a negative experience in the residence halls specifically. Even follow-up reporting didn't seem to work in these cases. What are you doing about that?
Well, it's again, and I want to give credit to Student Affairs and to Christina Gonzalez of initiating mandatory training for resident hall advisors, for RAs, for hall directors, training so that they know, again, what to do when there are allegations of discrimination and harassment. Also, giving the opportunity to our RAs to spend more time with students and talking to students than on administrative staff, administrative staffing. And I think that's a key point. Freshmen, think about it, are 6,000 plus freshmen living in the dormitories each year. We need to start when they're freshmen and start educating them about issues of harassment and discrimination. And we can do that through the RAs, through the hall directors, through this training that we're going to do. We also want to make sure that they report it. I mean, we have the website www.colorado.edu/report it, which students can report allegations again of harassment and discrimination.
Chancellor, I have a question regarding, not my mic is working. I have a question about the onboarding of incoming graduate students. According to the climate survey, about a quarter of PhD students feel that they did not receive accurate information about the availability of funding. This causes students to take on student debt and outside jobs that they didn't anticipate, which also affects their academic progress. How do we ensure that the information they receive from the departments is accurate?
That's a great question. And again, because we're so decentralized in all of our departments, we were sending out different letters with different information to graduate students by various departments. And this was an easy one to correct, and I want to thank the graduate school and our Dean John Stevenson for this, that now what we're going to be doing is having a template of, and be very transparent about what's in each of the letters. That's going to identify the expectations of our graduate students for the programs that they've been accepted to, and we'll state the amount of funding, the amount of support they're going to get. I want to have a uniform, transparent letter that goes out to all incoming graduate students so that there's not this miscommunication that has gone on. And again, John, I want to thank you and your staff for doing that. Again, that's an actionable item that was done quickly, and it will affect our students coming in the fall. And I hope it solves the problem, John, that you mentioned.
Thank you.
You recently released the Campus Sexual Misconduct Survey, which showed what seemed to be a shockingly high incident of sexual assault on undergraduate women on this campus specifically. How would you assure our students that they can continue to be safe here?
Well, first, and Joe, let me put something into context here. And any percentage is too high. The percentage that was reported by our students is very similar to the percentage that's been reported among other colleges and universities across the country. That's not to say it's okay. That's a problem. I just want to put it in context that we're not an outlier here. We really mirror other universities and colleges across the country. However, it's still too much. Too many students are having to deal with sexual discrimination, sexual assault, sexual harassment. And what we're doing, the first was hiring Valerie and really reorganizing and the office, the OIEC office, so that I would call it a one-stop shop right now. So students, faculty, and staff can go to OIEC and they can learn training, there's education, prevention, but also it's where they go to report incidents, where those incidents are investigated. It's one stop. Our students aren't going from one building to another, or staff are not going from one building to another, or faculty. It's one-stop shopping. It's with Valerie and her team. And we treat faculty, staff, and students alike so that, again, they're all coming to one office. There's not confusion. They can get what they need. The main thing is they have to report. They have to either self-report or tell somebody about it, and under our mandatory rules, and let's not forget that, under our mandatory rules, individuals do have to report to OIEC when they hear of or see allegations of discrimination and harassment.
We see from the climate surveys that a lot of the issues are the result of how students interact with each other, instructor-student interactions in the classroom. Are you going to implement campus-wide training to help people learn how to engage with each other in a culturally intelligent way?
Right, and this question comes up quite a bit about training and the type of training that we're going to do or we're planning to do. And this is one where I'm going to throw the mic over to our vice chancellors and executive director, because each one of them in Student Affairs and Odyssey and OIEC have plans to work with faculty, staff, and students on issues of training. And if you don't mind, I'd like for you to hear from them, from their offices. And Bob, maybe you could talk about what Odyssey and Faculty Affairs are doing.
Okay, can everybody hear me? So, yes, we're working with Faculty Affairs. We're identifying outside consultants who will help us by engaging faculty so that they have the tools so that they can understand how to deal with difficult conversations. Not only that, we will also help develop a group of faculty who can serve as resource or support for other faculty. And when we do onboarding of new faculty and new chairs, we'll also have them engage in this process. The other thing that we'll be doing is we'll be providing support across the board, in other words, through the new faculty, through Faculty Teaching Excellence Program, and through Graduate Teaching Excellence Program. And so that's what we'll be doing on the faculty level.
Valerie?
Hi, thank you. Appreciate the thoughts and the participation from the students. As the Chancellor mentioned, we do have, just as a reminder, a new education branch, and that has many functions. One of them certainly is mandatory training, which is both for the students, that's through new student welcome, community equity, as well as effective bystander, and that's mandatory for all incoming students. We also have the training that is for new employees, faculty, graduate students, that goes into our discrimination and harassment policies. I think one thing that I did want to emphasize that I think the Chancellor mentioned already is really a lot of the climate conversations that we are providing that kind of training. As the Chancellor mentioned, we have, on the employee side, bystander intervention education, implicit unconscious bias, managing difficult conversations, obviously the policy education, and there really has been, I have to say, over the last year, an upswell in terms of a lot of proactive communications from different departments wanting this information, wanting to get training on this. I think it really has been the Inclusive Excellence Project, people really coming to the forefront. So I think it's happening in a lot of places. So thank you.
Good morning. Through Student Affairs, we've taken a multi-pronged approach on this. So this past year, several of our staff, we've had some committees come together to develop workshops for our staff around difficult conversations. Our counseling center has had some sessions on implicit bias, and we've also had how to have difficult conversations. What we're planning for freshmen who are coming in the fall is for 300 to 400 who would want to be part of a program where we would use an intercultural assessment tool to assist the students coming in part of a program of how to have intercultural conversations around difference. What does that look like for them individually so that they understand where they are developmentally, and meeting the students where they are and what their needs are in terms of what workshops would help them to get better at whatever it might be that they need through this tool. So if they need assistance in learning how to have conflict around difference or dialogues, however that might look, or just having interactions day to day. So that's part of the plan in Student Affairs.
And Russ, I'd like for Russ Moore, our provost, to respond.
I'll just be brief. What we instituted this year, I have monthly chairs and directors meetings, so that's about 90 people who are the line level leaders on campus, department chairs, institute directors. What we've done is we instituted discussions rather than having a show and tell chairs and directors meeting. We're participating in an ethical decision-making process. So I want to compliment Catherine Shea, by the way, for kicking this off. But what emerged from those very first meetings that we had last fall was a desire for chairs and directors to be armed with the tools to deal with social dynamics inside the classroom. So sometimes there's social dynamics involving faculty and student dynamics that aren't the best that we would hope for. And oftentimes there are social dynamics between students and students. So what we're trying to do is institute discussions, provide scenarios for department chairs to work through very tough decisions, to try to identify when social dynamics are going wrong, and then for the department chairs to help equip their faculty to deal with these issues on campus. So that's just one example of things that are going on campus.
Thank you, Russ. I appreciate that.
Some people might say that CU-Boulder's reputation is one that might discourage students of color from coming to campus. You won't be comfortable, you won't be welcome, you won't be able to find a community. How do you respond to that criticism and that kind of reputation, and how do we change that together?
And I've heard that criticism many, many times over the years. And the fact of the matter is we have to change. We have to change how we do things on this campus from the standpoint of discrimination, of harassment, of campus climate. And again, I want to stress, and it's certainly my responsibility at the end of the day as chancellor, but I have to stress the only way that we're going to change the culture of the campus is to have all of you, is to have faculty, staff, and students working together with us. We can't do it by ourselves. I think if the public sees, and high school counselors and students of color that we now have on campus see that we're all working together on this, we'll start to change. But again, I have to stress the importance of us working together. You asked that first question, Joe, about, we've talked about this for a long time and we haven't changed. And I think one reason that we haven't is that we've not all come together as we should to make this campus a welcoming campus, a safe campus for all students. And that's the key point. When we do that, that perception will change.
Chancellor, over the last year, we've been having explicit conversations among our academic units about diversity and inclusive excellence. And the deadline for submitting their definition of inclusive excellence was March 15th. Have those come in, and what's the next step?
Yes, and I'm going to come back to Bob to answer that question, but I do want to make one point. I think we're doing a very good job. Bob's office has done a great job of making sure that both academic and administrative units are the academic UNIPs, that they're getting their plans, their definitions to Bob's office. If you haven't, please get them in as soon as possible. But I want to turn it to Bob to give more specifics about the plans themselves and what he plans to do with those plans.
So for those of you who've already submitted the plans, thank you. And for those of you who haven't, please get them to me as quickly as possible. But between now and August, the intent is to review those plans to understand what's held in common, what are the common strategies, what are the common definitions. We want to then engage campus in conversations, inter-unit conversations, so that we can build concrete recommendations that will allow us to attain our goals. Now, when I say attain our goals, we know that this is going to be an ongoing process. It's not as if this is going to be the end of the process. And then also we want to come up with a common definition for the campus-wide inclusive excellence, and we'll share that with you and engage you in conversations related to that.
We've talked about graffiti and the university's response to taking that down, but what does protecting students against offensive speech, but also allowing for freedom of speech and kind of this free exercise of academic debate, what does that look like outside of what we've already done?
Well, and again, I'm going to turn this over to Valerie because I want to make sure we get the right language when we're talking about pervasive and hostile speech that really inhibits an individual's chance for an education or for employment versus what we all believe in is academic freedom of speech. So Valerie, if you could just add to that from your standpoint.
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's a great question. In fact, it's probably asked at least once, if not multiple times, with folks coming to our office, people reporting, people concerned about the limits, frankly, of how we enforce it, how we educate, federal civil rights statutes such as Title VI, Title VII, and how that is really played, and the boundaries between academic freedom as well as the First Amendment. The typical lawyer answer is, well, it depends. I'm not going to say that, but it is worth sort of remembering that these kind of situations are always incredibly fact and scenario specific. But the general answer is that we really, both on this campus around the United States, have been having these conversations for over 50 years. I want to just sort of put that in context. Title VI, Title VII, they are not particularly new. The requirements to prohibit and address hostile environment have been around for quite some time, and we are quite adept. Both at a campus environment as well as in the United States in general, is sort of figuring out what those boundaries are. The Chancellor did a great job really providing some boundaries. In my office in particular, which really is supposed to be enforcing those federal civil rights laws, we really look at hostile environments. So these are not things that are offhand comments. These are not isolated comments. It can be verbal or physical conduct that really does rise to a level of severity and pervasiveness, okay, and that's really important. It also requires both a subjective component, someone thinks that I have been subject to a hostile environment, and an objective component, which is again very important, and that's what our investigators are trained to do, is to put on that objective lens. And so there are boundaries, and that's what we are trained to do, and it's fact specific. And certainly if anybody has any other specific questions about a scenario, you can definitely come talk to us. So thank you.
Thank you, Valerie.
So now we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience, and we received some of these note cards here, and I'll start with the first one. The survey indicates an enormous drop of enrollment of American Indian students, 106 students in the last 5 years, and comments highlighted not feeling welcome and considering to leave. How does CU change this climate for this group of students who are small in number?
So again, the survey showed both with our African American students, Black identified students, and Native American students. Again, it's a very small population. And the key, once again, is this welcoming climate, this work that we all have to do. What we know from our retention studies is that students leave the university because they don't have connections with individual faculty or staff or maybe older students. And that is, I think, a really critical point of making sure all of our students, especially our underrepresented students, our first generation students, are connected with adults on campus. Again, staff members, faculty members. That's again why I think we need that all of you need to participate and work with us on this, because when students are connected, when they feel connected and they feel welcomed, they're going to stay, and that's a key. We don't want to isolate any group on campus. We want to make sure that they're connected, they stay connected, and that they move forward for student success.
What role does the Greek community play in changing campus climate and culture?
Well, I think I will turn to Valerie on this one, but I was really pleased that the fraternities and sororities have reached out to OIEC for training. That, I think, was a very, very positive move. And Valerie, I'm not sure how many groups that you worked with, but I know that both fraternities and sororities did reach out to you.
Yes, that happened. It certainly has been in the past, and certainly we have really increased the training for a lot of student groups on the campus, including but not exclusive to Panhellenic, the Interfraternity Council. They did reach out to us. I think this was really in the newspaper last year. I got a tweet from former U.S. Department of Education Secretary Arne Duncan about really the partnership that was created specifically with the IFC. Really a training program that was created by our Director of Education and Prevention, Teresa Rowe, with the fraternities to have a really unique, I think, and tailored program. And again, like any of our student groups, for their situations in particular. We did all 16 chapters last year associated with the IFC, and we have a plan to do a similar type of training this spring.
As a new employee, I just completed the diversity training, and it had good guidelines around blatant discrimination. However, I didn't receive any training around microaggressions, which is also very common. What should faculty and staff do to prevent microaggressions around campus?
Good point. I'm going to turn it over to one of good question here. I'd like to, I don't know if someone from the cabinet, Christina?
I think we're doing this in different ways. So in student affairs, like housing and dining services has a whole program of education for staff around microaggressions. And we've had different workshops to reach out to different departments and units within our division around microaggressions. That's been led by Brian Shimamoto and his team. So that's one aspect for the staff, at least in student affairs, to get some exposure to microaggressions, what they look like, how that plays out in the workplace and working with others. I don't know if someone has anything else.
I would just say that I think that's an excellent point, and certainly the HR department is always looking at the trainings that we offer for our new employees, and so I think we'll add that to the list of things to make sure that we get that included and addressed specifically.
Green, but it's not working. Yeah. Yeah, on the faculty side, I'll just refer back to the program that Bob Boswell referred to. So Bob Boswell is working with Jeff Cox's office in Faculty Affairs to deploy some training to incoming faculty through the Faculty Teaching Excellence Program, as well as the faculty orientation process that we have every August when new faculty come in. Is this ours?
Since some of the harassment, inappropriate attitudes, and microaggressions are perpetuated by the same tenured faculty members, what is being done or being implemented when they refuse to change their behavior?
So one of the things, and I'll have Russ kind of address this one, but one of the things I've been most pleased about is we've really, Russ has really changed the structure of our monthly meetings with institute directors, department chairs, associate deans, and deans. In the past, those meetings have mainly been the administration talking to directors and department chairs about issues going on in the campus and really not having a dialogue. But I think, Russ, if you would just talk a little bit about how you've changed that structure, which I think will be extremely helpful.
Yeah, so earlier I referred to the new format for the chairs and directors meeting where we're engaging in conversations and working through tough scenarios that might occur in the classroom so that department chairs and institute directors can push some of these best practices and coping skills into their faculty. I also, last year, you may recall that it was the first BFA CUSG series of discussions, one of which was around academic freedom, and trying to clearly articulate the difference between what true academic freedom is to protect the freedom of thought and coming up with controversial ideas in one's scholarship, versus, I think, a conflation of an interpretation of academic freedom that says once I close my classroom door, I can do anything I want. That's not academic freedom. That's not covered by that. But we also have a very powerful faculty rights and responsibilities document that was developed by the faculty through the BFA that I ratified some 2 or 3 years ago. And I would encourage all our faculty and students to be familiar with the rights and the responsibilities of faculty. These are issues that are dealt with through faculty affairs. They aren't normally in the purview of the Office of OIEC. Too many acronyms around here. So this is something that is involved in the self-governance process. So what we're trying to do is promote through these conversations with chairs, directors, and then hopefully faculty this self-regulation and self-governance that are underpinned by a strong set of values from the campus.
And let me add, too, before Valerie, just one other point, and that is, when I've met with students this past semester, fall semester, spring semester, and faculty, graduate students, they've talked to me about 3 things. They've talked to me about being transparent, which is why we're here today and why we want to continue these conversations and dialogues. They also talked to me about taking action, and I think what Russ is doing with the institute directors and the chairs, associate deans, and deans is taking action in the various programs. The other key, though, that Joe raised in the question is accountability. And we have to hold the faculty accountable. And that's the job of our deans, of our department chairs, to make sure that we have the right training, the right information, but we need to hold the faculty and staff and all of us accountable for what we do. So I don't want to leave that piece off. Valerie, what did you want to
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add, that was a great hypothetical, frankly, in terms of saying where's that line between where a hostile environment might be created. First of all, I should mention that if you have, those isolated comments, these kinds of things that are said, maybe, one time to a person or two, don't forget that we have a quite robust informal resolution process in our office. And in fact, most of what is resolved in our office does not go through the formal investigative process. It goes through the informal. So certainly if we have any reports, certainly of anything that's based on a protected class, we are talking to the person that has said that, okay? It's not just that, because we don't do a formal investigation, we are not trying to say, look, that's inappropriate, and if it keeps happening, you could create a hostile environment. So that hypothetical, I think, was really teed up to say, even if there's a continued if there are continuing comments that are made, particularly, like I said, on a protected class basis, you could have the pervasiveness that could create that, and we would address that.
Since social climate affects everyone, have the faculty and staff been surveyed to see if they're also negatively affected by social climate issues, such as issues around race?
Kelly?
We're in the process of working on engagement survey for employees that we're expecting will be released in the fall.
Yeah, if I understand your question, John, yes, we do have data now suggesting that faculty, for example, female faculty and faculty from underrepresented minorities are negatively influenced by issues around race and climate. One example would be is in the promotion and tenure process. If we look at our faculty FCQ, faculty course questionnaire data, systemically the ratings for instructor ratings for female faculty and underrepresented minority faculty are lower. So we take that into account in the promotion and tenure process, so it's kind of providing a degree of difficulty correction when we go through the campus-wide promotion and tenure committee meetings. That also helps us inform what we want to do with regard to classroom dynamics around how students perceive different kinds of faculty. So that's all part of the process.
Thank you, Russ. Before I make some closing remarks, a good friend of mine, a good colleague of mine, Professor George Romero, asked if he could ask a question, make a statement. And George, of course you can.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for what you've done over the years. I've been here 45 years. And when you came here, from then on, you started to get involved and make changes for diversity. So I thank you for the career involvement and helping us with that on this campus and what you're doing now. You're a no-nonsense chancellor, and I love that. My question is why? I'm going to give you a scenario that's real. It just happened 2 weeks ago. So it didn't happen in cave times. It happened 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, a student, a Hispanic woman, who has a 3.975 GPA, a Betcher scholar, comes from a poor family, and in my department, Art and Art History, the art history area, refused to give her a TA-ship. Everyone else that got a TA-ship was lower than 3.97, okay? So, Mr. Soto, your question is relevant. So that's what happened. Now, I wrote a 62-page report over the weekend. I was so angry, and I turned it into my chair. This is the evidence of that, okay? They told her she could not get 3.97 Betcher scholar, Hispanic woman. They told her she could not get a TA-ship because she was from in-state, and the out-of-state students needed it more. and she could get loans to pay for hers. So they had to go and give it to people from out of state, not her, in spite of her GPA. They also told her, now in your microaggression part of the report, you mentioned that Hispanic students say that because of their identity, they are perceived as being not as intelligent as others, not as smart. The same person that was on this committee not to give her a TA-ship 3.97 Bencher Scholar, let us remember, said to her that she was taking she had to work. Lower class kids have to work. That she was working too much. Even though, and went on to say from that, getting all A's is not what education is all about. The only way we as professors have to grade people is by A, B, C, D, A, right? And she said, you're not learning enough even though you're getting all these A's. That's voodoo evaluation on the part of a professor. How did that professor know that that Hispanic woman, what she was learning was less than what white students were earning? Now you can call that a microaggression. I call it a macroaggression. I wrote a 60-page report that's in my departmental chair's office giving all the evidence, and I'll present emails that were sent, etc., where the evidence is right there against these people who did that to her. My question is, why is this still happening?
So, George, thank you for that. And I don't know why. I can't answer the why. But I can tell you that we'll certainly look into it. I'll certainly look into it. And see what factors were there. I mean, granted, a Bencher Scholar, a 3.9, graduates. We don't have a policy. I don't believe we have a policy. I'm sure we don't. That we favor out-of-state students compared to in-state students. This should all be based on quality and the quality of the student. But, Russ?
Yeah, so I think some of us can try to use this as a learning example. Professor, some of the things you brought up perhaps fall into an obligation to report. If there's some suggestion, any suggestion, that there's racial discrimination, this needs to be referred to Valerie's office. If there's unprofessional conduct implied here, this needs to be referred to the Office of Faculty Affairs for adjudication under the Professional Rights and Duties document. So we do have mechanisms to deal with this. And once again, I can't solve it. I'm not in your unit. Jeff Cox can't solve it all by himself. The Chancellor can't solve it. We need a whole community. When we see things like this, we have to bring it to the fore and allow our existing processes, which I think are quite robust, to try to work these things out to make sure that we're trying to deal with people fairly and equitably. So thank you for your comments.
I have to tell you that they did undo that after I submitted that 60-page report. And to punish me and her, they gave her the worst hours to teach as a teaching assistant. And they corrected it, but still the other issues that are there that I talked to you about on why they did it are still there in my report and still exist.
And please share that report with Valerie.
Agreed. This would both be a mandatory duty report kind of situation, and this would be something that our investigators could outreach to this student. Obviously, she would, have to voluntarily, be for that, as well as really a remedial kind of situation. And I just really want to emphasize that is not only do we have the investigative branch, but we have a director of remedial and protective measures. And the remedial part is making sure that someone is whole while they're going through this process. That can be academic, it can be employment accommodations, it can be really a whole host of things. And so this is clearly applicable. And so we can maybe talk afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, George, Russ. First, please help me to thank Joseph and John for being our moderators today. And I want to thank you to all of you who took time to join us today. And as I said in the beginning, our goal is to deepen our collective understanding and inform the actions that we will take to create an inclusive campus. And I hope you'll come to our next event, which is on April 15th in UMC 235 from 2 to 4 p.m. It'll be the second part of a two-part campus discussion focusing on social dynamics, and will be focused on how social dynamics in the classroom can influence student-to-student and faculty-to-student interactions, both of which are critical to student success. So, what would I like for you to take away from this discussion today? First, that this is an ongoing and evolving discussion. And second, that this is not business as usual. In fact, my hope is that people will look back and say, that's it. There was a pivotal point in 2016, and that's when we really started to change the campus climate. We intend to continue to be very transparent in our actions, data, successes, and failures. We will lay out action items. We will change and evolve over time. And we will hold people accountable for their actions. And to do this, I need everyone to participate, to work together to cultivate a consciousness of inclusion, to make it part of the fiber and fabric of who we are. So let me just leave you with this. I believe that working together, CU-Boulder can be a vibrant and engaging environment for all its members. Not the same, but together. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate it.